was some cables. I remember if you said they were like tucked up under.
I've got these two.
Is the thing you want to present on the internet anywhere or on that thing? Okay.
I got it on here. Is it better?
Well, that one might be a little bit less cabling to worry about.
Phillips.
It's a start. It plugs into that guy up there. But I haven't done this in a minute or two, so. Try to remember to give that
Last
back
time we
too.
couldn't get the videos to run.
What?
Last time we couldn't get the videos to run. Like
Here?
They were no, when we did
Oh,
it
okay.
at the
Well, we
Greek
got a
Orthodox
chance then.
Church. The guy was talking and the noise came at a different time. It was like,
I think the electronics
Keyboard and everything
a
somewhere.
little more
but-
sophisticated
Yeah.
here at the Greek Orthodox Church.
All the technology in this corner.
Who's the facilitator tonight?
I am.
Do you want me to make the announcement during open time, or do you wanna make the announcement, it's the CDBG advisory,
Hey, Bill.
committee, like,
Good evening.
recruiting for that? You guys
What's
can
going on
do it,
now?
right? It's like,
Yeah, but
I think
I'm
now
ready
we're-
to
now
make
we
it.
wait.
If we do it during open forum.
yeah, I mean, I'm happy to just announce that, because you guys have a process of voting on it and.
I'm having a representative.
I suppose. It must be.
Yeah, right. So,
What could it be doing right now?
Actually, I wasn't on the steering committee last year when that got chosen, but
yeah.
I think it was just somebody volunteered and they went, okay, you got it.
Oh, okay, I thought you already voted on it.
Make me do
Well, I
this.
think if there were several people who wanted to do it. And when does the committee start meeting?
Who's usually next? That's the problem.
I should put on the schedule, I can look it up. It is, I believe it's in the
I don't know why it's giving me a hard time.
We haven't opened up our, NOPA, so notice of funding
Right,
announcement yet, so,
We have multiple desktops.
so should
That's
we
what I
pick
really
somebody,
need.
preferably pick somebody tonight, or would it be?
I mean, we can, since they haven't opened it, I mean, I think like technically we can wait till next month, but it's probably good to give people a heads up.
There we go.
Okay.
I don't know why I had
latest
to,
one.
I don't know why I had to do
I
that
think
hacky way,
I
but
think,
I think you wanna go with the
maybe what we
29th.
should do is just, if you would
Okay.
just announce that it's gonna happen,
Prevention.
we'll say if anybody's interested in, taking that on, that's here, they should contact.
Now, do you see,
it's gonna get to 98% and then die.
underneath here, there's two videos. Can you pull it down or not? It won't move.
Oh, I can go back, maybe.
It might work here. We can see if it'll work.
Oh, is it embedded?
Yeah, it's embedded, but I don't know if it's gonna work or not. I've got it two different ways.
You want me to screen share it? You not, what? Like no one's ever used this computer before.
Thanks for giving the snack, though.
Can we move it down?
Oh, are you saying it's just like farther down here
Yeah,
somewhere?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Let's
there
see where
is.
it is.
7, 8, 9.
Oh, great.
I can't find it. Let's keep going.
Sorry, it's a little
Maybe it's
blurry.
not there. Maybe it might be not be here.
Okay, yeah.
There's lots of slides.
I know, but there's a video.
Okay.
Will it run?
Now, my wife comes, she'll be happy about that.
Okay, that runs. All right, well, there's two more. Let's see if we can. Two more.
Up higher?
I think so.
I don't know the videos, so I can make that sidebar a little bigger if that's kind of.
Nope. They're separate.
Okay, well, it looks like one of them works, so maybe when we get to it, the other one, I'm going to look like, oh boy,
No, no, no.
48 things.
Yeah, we're not gonna. But the videos are actually really pretty helpful.
I'm going one, okay,
Okay.
that's the teenagers.
Yeah, can we look at what's on the, what's on the
You can
thing
drive
again?
too.
Oh, I don't know how to do it.
If I go to slideshow,
File.
no, I'm not doing it.
Escape. Yeah, it's not gonna work. It's not there.
Do you think it's supposed to be toward like a third of the way
It's
through?
like it's another little file on that little thumb drive.
Okay, well, we could just swap over to it, I
themselves
guess.
and say why they want to.
Just
do it.
open
Can
that
we just
one.
escape?
And then if they're, I mean,
Yeah,
if
hold on,
they're
okay, alright,
on
media one,
or
that's it.
Media one.
you.
What I'd like to do is to run the media
Secret ballot vote.
in the beginning and get it out of the way. If we can. Yes.
That sounds good.
Is it good?
Has concern about the
Right,
health
that's it.
risks increase.
Okay, yeah,
And we're live.
okay, so,
I'll go back to the,
yeah, so I wanna run that one, and then I wanna run the next, there's another one, right? Because I'm
Other-
doing
no, no, no.
media two.
media two was,
Okay, that one, yeah. That says addiction.
okay,
And like tobacco,
so
Okay,
good.
yeah, good.
I don't wanna spoil it.
No, you don't wanna spoil it. Alright, okay, so
Is
I
it
want,
media three the one that was
the
this,
media three is the ones you saw,
that was actually in there?
yeah, so we're all set.
Now we can go back to our slideshow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, can I look at that?
Oh, I just,
No, this is fine.
Directly across.
going back to the beginning.
You have a,
There's some
It's
right,
quite loud, isn't it?
right here.
Yeah,
so
15 months old. Yeah.
Be able to hear it.
She's,
Yeah, she gave me that one. Yeah, some more. There's another there. Oh, well,
yeah, you got
okay.
No, I thought.
So, can you do
It's another generic.
Just control the page.
just run the two videos?
Oh,
And
sure.
then I can.
What's your name?
Yeah, I think this is wireless, so I don't have to like be in the way or whatever.
She's getting very active, so I know she was back this way.
So the video, the first one is like a minute, I think, a minute and a half, and the second one is like, it's
Dipping all over.
4 minutes long, but I only wanna show like the first
She
3
loves,
minutes.
she loves big. So it's
It's
gonna
into,
There's a transition in there somewhere.
it starts on opiate, heroin, this last section.
Wait, yeah, check.
Take this guy, just tobacco,
There's a dog in play as well, but he's, getting increasingly neglected,
Alcohol.
so that's.
opiates.
Okay.
And the opiate one, it's too long.
Oh, okay.
My big
Just cut that one off
hesitation
and
about
then
this
I'll
space, as a meeting space,
So
is
the
that
first thing you're gonna do is
there
start with
isn't
the
really
video.
any
Yeah.
place
First
for
couple.
kids to
With the
Media
Yeah.
media one,
And
the
it's-
media two, but not all of media
Yeah, I
two.
mean, we just don't
And then
have
the media
access
three
to
is
that.
embedded.
Media three's right in there if we get to it.
And it's a
We're gonna be moving.
teaching kitchen over there, so.
Oh, sense, alright.
Might not be the
So
most
I was about to
effective.
do yeah, kids get
I don't
a
need
feel
this.
there.
Yeah. Kids play, those places are nice.
Maybe I'll sit here.
But,
Where were you guys,
Well, I was gonna just.
we were in the DPW, meeting room, which is kind of this is a much nicer room,
Yeah.
but,
I was at one
but,
meeting.
if there were kids there, they could go out in the lobby and kind of hang out.
Yeah.
And draw pictures and stuff, they got bored.
Yeah.
You can't, you could, one time we had a bunch of kids who were kind of hanging around on the balcony.
Speaking
Sort
of-
of worked, but
Yeah, but it's.
as long as
What do
you're
they do here?
near the door with
Some
watching.
cheese?
Right.
Now, there's no real sidelines or anything. I assume that's the same room right there, behind that other door.
Yeah, yeah.
The same room, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it is,
So like there was no moon, whatever the new moon, there was no moonlight, so we had the best chance of seeing the aurora. That was like the goal. And the goal was achieved, and it was amazing. We rented an Airbnb place. It was him and his wife and me and my girlfriend and her husband came up for like part of the trip.
Oh, I never got the little signs out. That's awesome.
Like we home based and we did
A little late for that.
a lot of like ups and downs in terms of, you know, got sick for one day, then like kind of picked up different.
Anybody down there today? That's awesome.
I'll walk around the place.
Reykjavik is such a cool little city. I mean, it reminds me of
Absolutely.
He's upstairs.
and I looked at my watch and pulled this color and then we were briefly on a plane ride. When we
Oh,
flew
yeah.
last night. And I've been sleeping and then the spirits woke
I'm
up
the
and
only
got
city
this.
council.
Contact to see it.
You're the only one?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It wasn't right, and the other.
Because the others are combined.
Cooler view of it, but it was.
We actually went on a boat cruise.
Oh, cool.
The first one we went on, we didn't see it all the way to the end where everybody was inside. It will give you a ticket to go on another time.
Whoa.
We knew that. We did it early. But my girlfriend was super stubborn. She was not leaving that deck until we were. There was no chance that we would get anywhere. Holy, I mean, it's almost oh my God, there's not enough insulation. I was actually downstairs doing something.
It goes like this.
Whatever. And she was
Oh, yeah,
holding
it's
it up.
totally gerrymandered.
Because like she thought that they wouldn't give us the tickets. They actually announced it. They were like, hey, we're the governor, so we got to see a little bit. And they still give us the tickets anyway, which is really nice. And then we went out the next night, and yeah, it was a full, amazing show.
Oh, that's
I
awesome.
forget the doctor, because I know her for,
Bill.
my daughter, her.
I'm incognito.
Oh, yeah.
Where are you looking?
I'm Lucas Harris.
Yeah, around Alder,
Oh, nice.
right next to Bill. So the tree, it's gonna grow back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Connie was like, I love that little tree, what happened to it? And I was like, she's like, you gotta go over and knock on the door, and I was like, I'm not gonna go bother Bill, like, in the middle, it was like 8 o'clock, I was like, I'll send him an email.
Tree invasive species on my property. That tree,
Don't tell anybody I'm in city council.
We're getting back to the.
that tree,
Road anymore.
Norway maple, that's the one of Norway maple, which can't buy anymore. And the city council bushes, little berry bushes, between my house and where it's at.
You said the ones along the back of the property, those are some pretty trees, but they're not, you can't get them anymore?
Which one, that Norway maple?
Yeah, those are the ones that are right.
That's the one, that's the only one I have, about 40 feet high.
Oh, yeah. It's so pretty though.
I don't know, the columnar tree is very good for tight spaces. It's a maple is the only tree like that. Anyway,
I don't know, I was setting up.
Don't tell me
So I'm gonna do the
it'll grow back.
No, I shared your. She was excited. We had our lilac tree die, or it fell over. It didn't die, it fell over. Like basically, it looked like it was doing well, but maybe it did a little bit of work to it. And then I think in Chicago or something, somewhere for work. And she was like, it's not looking very good, and like it was leaning. And then like 2 days later, just like it completely fell over. So we had ferrets out. Somebody else to look at it. So, and it's not gonna be very much. Like 100, maybe $20 or something. And they're gonna come and cut it back and check it away. They said it'll come back pretty strong. We're hopeful.
I bet over my backyard neighbor.
I'm not able to make it.
And I can't reach you with my forks on.
I said, tell her.
Yeah, really reasonably priced. Like, to come out and like basically chop it okay, I'm gonna back it up. So I figure I'll get my shovel.
Well, I've been, there's a lot of snow. Once I get that thing cranked up, I don't mind going to my neighbors at all. 'Cause it's a big machine and.
I see it as good exercise for myself, so I'm using it as an excuse.
Okay.
I've been doing
Wow.
two sushi rolls, I'll give myself. Connie's allergic to fish, so she ended up not being able to make it.
6, 7,
So I was like, I'm gonna take the opportunity.
First day, second day, first day. Come back Saturday.
One more phone call.
Yeah.
So you can fly,
Is it time
flights
meeting?
leave at 8 o'clock.
Is it time meeting now?
It's 6, 7, and 8.
That's the travel day. The last 2 days.
Anything is better than nothing for him to be a champion.
He'll learn so much. He'll learn so much.
Getting older.
Just the last one. I just moved up. My wife got up in May. I moved up in September. So, Mount Central Massachusetts. I was working in Boston. So I'm a lawyer. So,
What firm?
down there. So,
Yeah, okay. I do legal tech consulting. I work for Aurora North Software, so we're an NPA partner.
Okay, cool.
So
Yeah.
I do mostly time entry, so do business with dating.
Gotcha.
Um,
You know the
Yeah, little bit.
Forums, people raising something.
I went to Yale actually, so.
And I'm gonna pass this around.
No, she's
Sign
here.
in from the yellow.
Yeah. So she used to work at UVM, and now is in the Essex Free Library.
I used to do.
You're welcome.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Quick text, crazy color.
Maybe a clipboard. Actually, I have that pen. Let me grab that pen. Yeah, yeah.
The fundraisers are.
Make it feel a little more substantial. That was provided by the market. So.
Everyone ready for the snow?
Snow tires on, new record, 23 minutes.
That's in line different.
I had to get a lot of garage to go.
We're on such a big line.
Last night, we
Yeah.
tying together
That's what I
sets.
figured.
I had like
And it's not up on us.
Yeah.
like a zip up hoodie and a sweatshirt.
Charger.
And it was perfect. I was like, this is great. This is what you need. This is fine.
When I did it myself this time.
43 minutes, figure every hour out what that is.
Yeah.
No, you don't have to ready.
Well, I'm not selling it, I'm not selling my services. Like,
I'm not being cold.
I'd probably get more efficient if I was. Try to figure out how to do this now.
That's cool.
But not in the US.
Take the shot.
Sure.
Always say,
You can do it.
you can always put on a little layer, be arrested by your name.
Exactly, that's a very good point. Yeah. I love even if you want. Yeah.
Texting one of our presenters here. He's sure he's on the way. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to the Ward 5 NPA meeting. We have kind of an interesting agenda it's kind of unusual for us, so we're focusing on, did everybody get an agenda? You want to we're focusing on the theme of addiction and recovery tonight, and we have several people here who are going to speak about that and answer questions. And we're really hoping that this is the beginning of a conversation in Ward 5 and around the city about this issue. Should be an exciting program. First, we've got, as you see on the agenda, we have open forum, which we always start with. Open forum is for announcements, questions, statements, and items of community concern. And then tonight we have, since we have a vacancy on the steering committee for the NPA, we want to have a chance for people to express an interest in that position, and if there's more than one person who wants to do that, then we'll have people give a statement of who they are, a short statement of interest, and we'll have an election. And I think it will have a secret ballot. So I have the ballot here. And there won't be any recounts. So
What about hanging chads
Signatures.
no hanging chads.
or extensions one more time?
So open forum, anybody have an announcement? I know Pet wanted to announce something, but Pet, you want to start with that?
Oh, no. Hi, my name is Pet Kiamani, I work for the Community and Economic Development Office, Department of the City. And every year we manage this large grant through the Housing Urban Development Department, and it is called the Community CDBG, so Community Development Block Grant. And what this grant does is that it gets allocated to different community organizations. It helps with alleviating poverty in programs and also improving accessibility and infrastructure. And so we, every year, invite each representative from each ward to be on advisory to help us allocate this money. So I just want to announce that we're going to be opening this up again. And so if you're interested, you can, to represent Ward 5, you can connect with a committee member. They can let me know, and I can send the information to you.
Our email addresses are on this agenda. So if you're interested in doing that, it's actually, how many meetings total?
It is 4 meetings, but you'll be reading like about 20 to 30 different applications through that are submitted through different organizations.
It's a really important job, and it's handling, it's actually allocating a large amount of money, a significant amount of money. You know how much last year?
I think it's about $700,000.
Yeah, so it's an important job, so if anybody is interested in doing that for this year, you don't have to sign on for a 10-year term or anything, but just for this year and this round of grants, please contact us, and we will announce it again next time, and we'll be probably contacting people who have an interest in it, just to see if we can follow up with them. Other items for open forum?
Yeah, so I'm actually here as a proxy for the Department of Public Works, Ben Travers. I'm on the Ward 5 Steering Committee. And DPW had actually reached out to us to be on the agenda for this meeting, but because we had dedicated so much of this agenda to a particular topic of the evening, I asked if they could come in December. However, they did want to let us know, you may have seen something on Front Porch Forum or elsewhere, that they're considering changes to the residential permit parking program for streets with resident-only parking. And they gave me these slides for the purpose of saving paper. I only printed out one, which I can circulate around if people are interested in seeing what's up. If you want a copy of it, I'll have it in my email. And as Andy pointed out, my email address is on there. Feel free to email me and I can circulate it around. But the reason why they wanted me to circulate this now, they will be coming to our December meeting to talk about it, but my understanding is that the Planning Commission is taking this up at their meeting on November 28th. The gist of it really, and you can look at it, but it's to put more structure around the resident parking program, instituting me, and if you're really interested, know that there's meetings coming up for, before the planning commission and so on. If not, wait till December and you'll get the update then.
Can you be a little clearer? Is it that they want to institute resident-only parking in Ward 5?
So they've indicated that currently there's 8 miles of curbside parking in Burlington. And I guess, are there resident-only neighborhoods in Five Sisters, John? Yeah?
And
No.
Southwood,
Yeah, I think Southwind, so it only applies to the places, it's not expanding
Right.
resident-only parking. It's just in the places that have resident-only parking, the program's going to go through some changes.
Right. Yeah, so that's what they were indicating. And it's largely, with respect to a fee structure, capping the number of permits, giving people contractor permits, so on and so forth. But I'll pass, I can start with you if you want to take a look at it.
Well, no, don't answer. I mean, if it's just Southwind, I mean, that's.
Well, King Street has some, there's a few places, but like, you would know if your street
Yeah.
had it,
Right.
and it's not intended as an expansion.
Okay, all right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I should say, and I should have started with this, that, there are 2 other, members of the Ward 5 Steering Committee current here tonight. Joe Derry is over there, and Bill Keogh is right here. We do have, 2 other members of the committee, who couldn't be here tonight, Alec Bauer and Joanna Grossman. And then we normally, at full strength, we have 7 people on the, steering committee, and, one of our members left, at the beginning of the fall, and now we're filling that vacancy. Other open forum announcements, questions, statements? Okay, let's do, how many people who are here are interested in being on the steering committee? All right, Mohammed and Billy. Great. So there's a contest. I would ask each of you to just say who you are and why you want to be on the, why would you like to be on the steering committee? Who wants to go first?
So my name is Billy Clark. I just moved back to Burlington. I've been living outside of Boston for a few years. I moved to Burlington to go to UVM, and when I went to UVM, I fell in love with 2 things: my wife and the city of Burlington. Met my wife senior year at UVM. We stuck around and got our master's in English together at UVM, and moved into the downtown and just fell in love with the city and knew this is where we wanted to be and raise our family. And so I'm an attorney, so I went back to Boston to go to law school and got a taste of what that was like, and knew that's absolutely not what I wanted to be at, and was constantly trying to get back up here throughout. And so when my wife and I got pregnant with our first child, we wanted to come back up here, and had always hoped to be in Ward 5 in the South End, and were able to buy a house on Locust Terrace where we renovated last winter, and my wife moved in the spring. I just moved in September, and I'm now working in Burlington, and really just looking for a way to get involved in the city and to give back to this place that I love. So I would love to be a part of it, but I also will meet any meetings regardless. So hope I can get you both.
Hello, I am Mohammed. I grew up here in Burlington. Actually, I was born in Kenya. Came here when I was 7 years old, and I went to Champlain Elementary School, Edmonds Middle School, and then Burlington High School, and graduated in 2014. I just got back about a few months ago. I went to New Hampshire, small private school in New Hampshire. Just graduated a few months ago, came back, and I just wanted to get involved and kind of give back to the community that gave a lot to me. I have 10 younger siblings, all who are involved in this, in the entire, from the element, from kindergarten all the way up to high school. I have siblings in all those schools, so I'm hoping, I can be involved in the community so that I'm aware of, things that, and the decisions that are being made that will eventually be impacting my siblings and my neighbors
still in this cup. Did you get pen?
I was waiting.
Waiting to borrow?
Someone to give it up.
Right. I like it. Oh, thanks. The name's spelled correctly, right?
I had a caucus where I forgot to vote for you.
You guys have stickers? I want a sticker.
Yeah, I voted.
Probably don't even have to give the pens back.
That's true. We have a lot of them. Okay, that's great. Well, we'll, let Ben tabulate the results, and, we'll go into the rest of our evening. I'm still waiting to hear from, Grace Keller, but Jackie, how do you say your last name? Corbley, from the Burlington Police Department is here. Our thought was to do, essentially, 15-minute presentations and then time for questions. But it seems like we have a little bit of, we might have a little bit more time if, especially if Grace doesn't come. So we'll shoot for 20 minutes and then leave time for questions. Come up, you ready? Yeah. You can sit if you want to, or I will sit. Okay.
So, I am Jackie Corbley. I'm actually a city employee, based out of the Burlington Police Department. I have been working in the field of addictions for 33 years, mental health as well. I have to say, Catherine, is this your slide here? This is really symbolic right now for the work that we have been up against. We had a 3-month-old with an addictive mom who we have spent the past 5 days looking for. We had a 3-month-old who was living with a mom on Pearl Street who is in the throes of human trafficking, which I'll talk about, which is not uncommon when we talk about this addiction. And have been really working to get her in a safe place. And then we had a 9-month-old near this location whose mom was overdosing with her partner, and luckily the Shelburne Police, we have kept in contact with all of our law enforcement partners, were able to recognize, because I've talked about this particular person, and they were able to call me up and say, we can't find her, and the mom put her in a dresser and locked the dresser because she was terrified that the police would take her baby away. And we've been working for 6 months to make a case that this child needed to be in a safe place. So this is just rather apropos right now, because we are truly up against it. I will tell you, as somebody who's worked in this field for a long time, and the chief asks me this all the time, I've never seen an epidemic like we're up against right now, and I do not use that lightly. We've been struggling nationwide with this epidemic now for about 4 years plus. Last year, we've lost 72,000 people, more than the Vietnam War combined, more than traffic accidents over the last 10 years, more than the HIV crisis. 72,000 lives were lost in 1 year. Prior to that, in 2016, there were 67,000, and prior to that, in 2015, there were 53,000. So we're going in the completely wrong direction. I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about just some stats, a little bit about addiction, and a little bit about what I am doing and the work that we are doing in the city, because I will tell you, you folks should be really proud of your leadership. We are cutting edge nationwide right now and how we're really addressing that. And I think partly, not only from the partnerships and the services we're creating, but because you have a chief who has made it personally his personal objective to learn everything he can get his hands on about this epidemic, which is, I can tell you from a law enforcement standpoint, is highly unusual. And you have a mayor who is also really trying to work really hard to educate himself. And then you have all of those partners. We could talk about city council, we can talk about the various initiatives we're doing with our stats, our state agencies, our federal agencies. Everybody is working really hard to understand why are the numbers going in the direction that they are going. You know, if we were just talking about heroin, that would be one thing. We talk about opioids. So I think it's important to recognize we have opiates and opioids. Opioids are a class. That includes all of those prescription pills that you talk about. Plus, we can talk about heroin, and we can talk about other substances. That would be one conversation, but the game has changed, and we're now talking about fentanyl. And I want to just get you to imagine, go to a beach and take 3 little grains of sand. That is enough to kill you. So imagine if you're a dealer and you're cutting heroin with fentanyl. They're not sitting in the lab saying, I'm gonna cut this, you know, we have 15 customers and we're gonna equally distribute those little grains. It's not how it works, because frankly, dealers, because the epidemic is so broad right now that somebody else will be right in their steps, the next person to use. Now, fentanyl, you know, when we started talking about this drug, and it's 50 to 100 times more potent than heroin. When we started talking about that, we were talking about fentanyl being cut in heroin. Now we're finding fentanyl in cocaine, crack. We're finding it in marijuana. We're finding it in a variety of different substances. Plus, the police narcotics unit just did a buy the other day, and somebody had taken pure fentanyl and made it into tablets looking like Xanax. If you take that much fentanyl, you will die. Grace Keller is here, so I'm not going to talk a lot about the Narcan and that. I'll let Grace talk about safe recovery and the work that's happening there. So let me quickly just take you back to your chief of police being hired and the mayor saying, I have things I want you to focus on, and one of those being the opiate epidemic. He goes out, educates himself, decides that, well, one of the things I'd like to do is have a public health person, an addiction person, social worker in my department. I gotta tell you what, it's really rare. I think I literally was the first social worker in a police department in the country. Now there are police departments around the country who have embedded social workers, but it was his out of the box thinking that said, wait a second, we need somebody who has this knowledge base. So we've spent the past 2 years really educating officers, one, on how to recognize when somebody is overdosing. How do you approach that? How do you look at this person as an individual who has a chronic health disease? Because that's what addiction is, a chronic health disease. And then how do we go out and develop other partnerships? So one of the things that my role has done, we have a ComStat meeting that meets monthly, headed up by the chief and the mayor. We have 35 to 45 partners, and I'm talking the federal prosecutor, Christina Nolan, the agency secretary, Al Gobay, the commissioner of health, Dr. Levine, Dr. Leffler, Eileen Whalen from the hospital. This meeting, and I think a lot of it is how the mayor approached this meeting, has brought key partners to the table. And we talk about a variety of things in that meeting. It's very much a systems meeting. It's not about humiliating people, but it's about, this is not working. Our inbox thinking that might have worked for another substance, really need to look at how much we're prescribing and how we're prescribing. Looking at the pain clinic, recognizing that we need to look at other modalities for pain before we jump to a narcotic. Recognizing that people do have chronic pain, and there are legitimate people who need a medication, and we can't label everybody as somebody who's a potential abuser, that there is a population of people who have chronic pain, and without the medication will be in a whole lot of hurt. Plus, we know that the suicide numbers with folks with chronic pain with medication, you really need to pay attention to that. And we've looked at things like people going into jail, being incarcerated, making sure that medication is offered in the jail, buprenorphine, methadone, Vivitrol. So that meeting really conveys key players, and we have those really hard, I think, respectful conversations. And we do that every month, and we've been meeting now for 2 years, and I think we have some successes to really be proud of on the conversations we've had and how we've had those conversations. I was at the police department 2 months, and I quickly recognized that these folks are really up against it. I would put a kudos into your police department. I have to tell you, if you do not understand what they are up against, you need to go do a ride along with them, because these are the folks, along with our EMS partners in the city, who come across the person who's on active overdose, who is turning blue and basically dead. You talk to officers, they will tell you, I went to the academy to protect and serve. I did not go to the academy to be an addictionologist and a mental health clinician. That's, though, what they're up against. They're up against a fair amount of people who have chronic mental health disorders, and individuals who are addicted, whether it's alcohol, which is the #1 abused substance since 1946, and I think it's an important, because opioids have taken so much energy, rightly so. Alcohol still, though, is the #1 abused substance. Those folks and young cops are going out and they're being faced with these very real life situations. So I went to the chief and said, I'd like to bring folks together, and we now proudly can say that we have every law enforcement partner sits at the table 2 times a month, and we just did it this morning. We take every overdose, fatal or non-fatal. We take every drug interaction in Chittenden County, and we talk about how we're gonna work with these folks. So-and-so might have overdosed in Colchester, but we know they're a Burlington resident. How are we gonna do this? Are we gonna do outreach? Is an officer gonna go out? How are we gonna approach this? The first goal in this group is treatment and getting folks to know that they're not alone. And it's really interesting that here we have law enforcement partners, and their primary goal is getting people services. It's not arresting. You will not find a cop that will tell you we're gonna arrest our way out of this, whether you're a chief or whether you're a first-year patrol officer. So we work really hard to make sure that the officers who are going out to their departments have the up-to-date information and can then make those decisions and really work with folks. And we, like I said, we meet 2 times. If we have a fatal overdose, we as a group consider that a failure. And just as I pulled in, we talked about a fellow. This morning, we're really concerned. He's overdosed 6 times in 7 days, and as I was pulling in, he was actively overdosing at Mr. Mike's. So we had the conversation this morning, and that information was distributed to the officers, so the 3 officers that responded with EMS knew this guy because we had highlighted him and said we need to pay attention to this guy, and they were able to intervene. It was not a fatal, it was a non-fatal. He denied going, he did not want to go to the ER, but we were able to get him resources, and tomorrow morning I'll try to catch up with him, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're just trying. Anytime you have an opening, I'm gonna leave some cards. We give a card, we give a name, we say go to Safe Recovery, go here. We're just trying to plant the seeds, because you never know when that one time that person will say, I can't live like this. I don't want to live like this. And we've planted those seeds so they know where to go. So that's substat. We have a couple other stats I'll quickly tell you about. KidStat, which is, we meet monthly. And that is a stat that's headed up by Officer Moyer, BPD officer, heads all the domestic violence cases. We talk about women in the throes of domestic violence, but that meeting is to talk about the kids. How are we, what are we doing with the children? What do we need to do? How can we pay attention to those kids? And we kind of brainstorm a response in those meetings. And then the other meeting that we are doing is called Family Stat. That's new. That came about because the head of DCF for Chittenden County said, Jackie, there's so much I want to say in CommStat, but I can't say it because my work is confidential. I want to create a meeting where we can take those high-risk families. And so we've created a meeting that meets monthly. The work is going on a regular basis, but we as a group meet monthly. The women who make it to that table, or men, are people who are facing incarceration, or individuals who've had 3 to 5 overdoses in the course of 7 days. We made that cut because those are the highest risk women that the Department of Children and Families are dealing with. The purpose of Family Stat is that 95% of the people that are addicted, when we talk about opioids, there's a trauma correlation. And we know that when we separate kids from their birth moms, from their caretakers, we're perpetuating that trauma response. And so the goal of Family Stat is to get the caretaker mom, in most cases, treatment, keep the young person in a safe place, and then reunify them with wrap services pretty tightly, because we really, really want to make sure that that young person, A, is in a safe place, but we've reduced the amount of time they're separated because of that trauma response. So those are some of the stats that we are doing. My role is to organize the ComStat meeting, I organize the Substat meeting, and I participate in the Family Stat and KidStat meeting. Initially, the position said policy, and I think we quickly found that there needed to be a person in the department who could really talk and work with folks. So the position has evolved. Like any new position, it's kind of we're figuring out where the needs are. And so I work with a lot of folks who the narcotics department folks bring in on warrants, or people who come in either through the uniform side or through the detective side. So it's not uncommon for detective merchants, sergeant merchants to say, Jackie, I have somebody, we just went out and did a warrant, she's here, can you talk to her? You know, we just went out and we had a pretty serious crime, and this individual woman is on drugs, and she really would like to have a conversation. So my role is, I'm not law enforcement, and I'm also not there as a clinician, which is very important, because if I were there as a clinician, which I have been, I would need to pay attention to CR 42. I'm not a clinician, and I purposely said to the chief, do not make me a clinician here, because if I'm a clinician, I can't talk, and I need to be able to talk to people. So I am a person in this role who has a lot of experience and really can start to thread the needle for folks. And so, not uncommon, I might have somebody and they need to go to the Chittenden Clinic, or they need to go to residential treatment, or they need to go out of state. My role is to kind of help weave that picture for folks and to kind of be that safe place where they can call and they can access those resources. I do a lot with the chief and the mayor around just policy, what's going on out in the country. I work a lot in the department with the officers if they have questions. And I work a lot in the department. This is really hard work, and officers, you know, you see one overdose, that's a lot. You see two overdoses, it starts to really wear on your psyche. So I have officers who are like, can I just talk to you? This really sucks. Like, why aren't we changing the curve? Why aren't we doing things differently? Why is it I'm writing an affidavit and they're going to court and the judge is letting them walk? Like, make sense of this for me. So not only am I a sounding block for folks that we're coming in contact with, but also those folks in the department. Because this position has spread out and we're doing a lot with police departments, it's not uncommon for other departments to call and say, can you come out and talk to a female, might have been a Burlington resident, but now she's living in Mallett's Bay. Can you have those dialogues? So that's a lot of what I'm doing. I'm also partnering a lot with a woman by the name of Katie, who does human trafficking out of the South Burlington Police Department. And so we do a lot of tag teaming. I will tell you that human trafficking right now is out of this world for young girls between the ages of 16 and 35. We're seeing a lot of that, whether it's forced sex, whether it is truly trafficking along the seaboard, whether it's prostitution. You know, one of the things about addiction is not only does it really doesn't care who you are, but you will do things that your morals and values when you were younger said you weren't going to do. Because the one thing that you do not want to experience when you're addicted to opioids is being dope sick. You will do anything humanly possible to not get dope sick. And the stuff that people find themselves engaged in when they're sober or in recovery or in a space between using will tell you, I never thought that this would happen. So I think we're making some headways, but I'm here with some bad news. And the bad news is we've worked really, really hard to keep methamphetamine out of this community, and it's here. We had really worked hard, and I used to be the clinical director for the state of Vermont, and we came up with all kinds. We're going to put Sudafed behind the counter. So if you know and you need Sudafed, you have to go to your pharmacy and you have to sign that piece of paper because it's no longer on the shelves. because that's one of the primary ingredients when we talk about meth. It started about 8 years ago in Hawaii, Washington State, California. Typically with addiction, you can look at drugs on the West Coast and there's a 2 to 5 year span getting to the East Coast. We hoped we weren't going to see it, but we're seeing it. And we had a fellow that we do a lot of work with, Dr. Rawson. He works a lot with the police department. He's 40-year psychologist at a UCLA, moved back to Vermont, used to teach at UVM. He said that the first people that are going to see the budding epidemic of meth are going to be the police department. And this morning, one of the questions we had before us as a group, how many departments in Chittenden County are seeing meth? Every single one of the departments raised their hand. How many of you are seeing, when you do drug busts or car stops and you suspect that there are substances, how many of you are seeing meth in the car or on the person? And easily, they're saying right now, it's easily 3 out of 5 stops, they're finding methamphetamine. So we're paying attention. We're trying to get a jump on this. The state is trying to get a jump on this around stimulant abuse. We in the department are trying to get a jump on this. We are going to make sure that our officers around Chittenden County, but at BPD, understand what meth is, what it looks like, how to pay attention to it. How many people in this room know what methamphetamine is? So you know that methamphetamine is typically anywhere from a 9 to 14-hour high. It's not amphetamine, it's methamphetamine. So we're talking about a high, a stimulant high that can last long amount of time. The body can only stay awake for so long. So what we see typically in regions that have really been overcome with a meth issue are people then use opioids to come down. Opioids are a depressant. So you're using a stimulant to get yourself up, but you gotta come down. The body needs to rest. So it's not uncommon to use opioids to bring yourself down. Now the concern we have are that we have a fair amount of people on medication-assisted treatment. So if they're also taking meth, they're now gonna override their medication to get their brain to click on to bring that stimulant high down. And so this has the potential to be a game changer. Not that fentanyl was not bad enough, but now we're adding methamphetamine to the mix. This will be a game changer on how we're going to address this. I want you to know that we are aware of it and we are working on it and we are making sure folks are educated and we're just, we're meeting on a regular basis to have those conversations. We've got some really cool things going on in our community. Not only do you have a social worker in the police department, but we also have, and Grace can get more into this, but the chief came to me about 9 months ago, 10 months ago maybe, and he said, Jackie, I think that we need to put buprenorphine everywhere. And I want to have this low barrier buprenorphine, and I'm like, oh my God, he's lost his mind. Because I'm a trained clinician, and like, in my world, you get medication-assisted treatment, you get counseling. Like, you don't think about doing those separate. And he's like, you know what, I know you're gonna react when you hear this. I want to see if we can find a place to give buprenorphine out. The counseling can come, but I want to make sure we get buprenorphine to stop people from fatally overdosing. So like I said, my first response was he's lost his mind. Then I said, wait a second, maybe he's onto something, and he directed me to the World Health Organization and had a number of conversations with folks, and I came back and I said, oh my God, this is genius. This is genius, because what is the one concern we have with an opiate epidemic? Fatal overdoses. If we can stop the fatal overdose to get folks into a space where you can then have a conversation about treatment or about next steps, that's a win. So we have 2 such programs, and Grace can talk about safe recovery in the work that they are doing. I will say, I don't want to take your thunder.
Take it.
I will say that there was a fellow who I knew quite well. I'd worked with him in a number of settings. And I used to be the clinical director for Maple Leaf a while ago. He had been to Maple Leaf a couple of times, really struggled with his addiction, had gone to Rikers Island, had gotten medication-assisted treatment, had come back to Vermont, got incarcerated, and medication-assisted treatment was not an option. He was taken off his medication-assisted treatment. He was taken off his medication for his mental health issues. 3 days later, he was deceased. He was dead in Burlington in Church Street in a apartment. His mother, who I got to know, who was an OBGYN, and her husband, his father, who I had met, but like in a different context, really got to know Kim and had profound respect for Kim. And when the Low Barrier Butte initiative was coming to fruition at Safe Recovery, Kim decided that she was going to take her OBGYN practice and push it off a little to the side and get her license and prescribe buprenorphine as a way to honor her son. So her son has been deceased now for 13 months, 14 months, and Kim is now the doctor working at Safe Recovery prescribing buprenorphine. Every time I tell that story, it chokes me up because I'm thinking, this was her fear. Her fear was that she was gonna lose her child. She lost her child. And if you knew Sean, like any loss, this was a young fellow, mid-20s, graduated, brilliant. And like all those stories, I think, you know, we could sit and talk about another young woman, Madeline Linsemer, who her obituary went viral, around the world, viral. The chief wrote an op-ed in response to that. You know, Madeline is another person who I worked with, incredibly amazing young woman, had a 3-year-old. Oh God, 6 weeks ago now, she did not overdose, but she was addicted to opioids. We believe died of endocarditis, but she died in a hospital bed, handcuffed, her feet and arms, because she got picked up on a warrant. And we had to do all kinds of ACLU and all kinds of fancy stuff to get her mom in there to be able to say goodbye to her daughter, who died of endocarditis, which is a disease, inflammation of the heart. It's not uncommon with people who are addicted to opioids. And it's a horrific, horrific way to die. So,
Jackie, I'm gonna ask you to wind
yeah,
up
yeah.
so that we can have a little time for questions before we move on.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that there's a lot happening. And I guess I would end and say that it's wonderful we have so many partners, but we can't do this alone. We need our communities. And people say all the time, what can we, as a citizen, as a community member, what can I do? Here's my response. We need to remove the shame that we attach to addiction. We need to look at folks who are your neighbors, your sisters, your brothers, your friends, community partners. They have a chronic health disease. And we need to treat them as we would with somebody with high blood pressure or cancer. Nobody asks for this way of life. And so I think the one thing we can do as a community are to recognize these are people in the throes of an addiction who did not ask for this way of life. And if it means giving them a job and taking a risk, if it means offering them an apartment, housing situation, recognizing that these folks really, really want to be contributing members of society and will do anything to be recognized. So that's my spiel.
I think everybody's had a deep breath. And this is a chance to ask Jackie questions. Jackie, you still have to leave at 7:45? Is that right?
Yeah.
Jackie's gonna have to leave in a little while. But this is a chance to ask questions about the tremendous amount of information that you shared with us.
Yeah.
So what is the age for addiction and even overdose in itself is the most random? What is the age frame?
Age frame? I think if we were to look at our stats would say that, I don't know, Grace, I would say right now it's like mid-20s up, probably to 40, but I would also preface and say there have been folks in their 50s, 60s, 70s who have overdosed, and there have been young people who have overdosed. I don't know about the gender split as much. I don't think there's much of a gender split. I think if we were to look at the numbers, we've seen more males, but here's the thing that we need to be proud of. Here's the curse in all of this. Our state has done a tremendous job of getting Narcan out into the community. There are some states you can't even get Narcan, or you have to pay for Narcan. Vermont has done a really good job getting Narcan. What is Narcan? If you're overdosing, did you bring Narcan with you? Yes. If you're overdosing, Narcan is a substance that you'll put in somebody's nose and it reverses the overdose. And so we don't really, I can tell you the non-fatal overdoses when there's been a 911 phone call. I can't tell you the number of overdoses, and I just said this to the chief this morning. I think the number of non-fatal overdose is 10 times higher than what we're getting reported, because people don't call, a lot of folks don't call the police, and a lot of folks have Narcan and are administering Narcan to revive themselves, and EMS might not even get called on that. I think it depends on the situation, so it's kind of a non-answer right now. Okay.
In terms of preventative measures, have we considered experts kind of in schools?
Yes.
To start that early?
Well, so here's where you can have a voice. 8 years ago, we had student assistance professionals in all the schools, and I was one of those folks years ago. And student assistance professionals are people where young people can go talk to if they have an addiction, and it doesn't get reported to the administration. You can start to develop that trust and try to talk about how to get help. The budget was cut significantly 9-10 years ago with SAPs. I think that this is where you can have a voice and say, we'd like to see all schools. And my advice, my thinking is, a lot of times people think, let's have SAPs in high schools. I will tell you, in high school, if you're using, you're using. I think one of the things we need to talk about is having SAPs in middle school. We also need to talk about how we're talking about resiliency and prevention with elementary age youth. We have so many young people who are exposed to parents and caretakers who are actively using. What tools are we giving them? And I think that the mayor recognizes that, and I know that Catherine is going to talk about this, because one of the models that we're really excited about is the Iceland model, and I think the mayor's excited about it, and I think you're going to see more in Burlington, see more of that roll out. So, any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, excuse me, the powerful presentation. I'm gonna cry a little bit, apparently. I've seen you speak before, of course. I took a course on addiction. Excuse me. I audited a course on addiction, that you get to speak at Champlain. And I asked the question, what can we do? And you said, take away the shame. Excuse me. One of the things that really hit me was your statement saying that people want to do as much as they can. And that was very true for myself. I had a gambling addiction, and I was really fortunate to kind of catch it early. And I mean, I'm sure people would debate that, my mother in particular. I have to laugh because it's how I deal with things. But I was really fortunate to celebrate 10 years since my last bet this May. Thank you. And it's really amazing how when you're in an addiction, literally nothing matters. It just doesn't seem important. And when you come out of it, it's very clear that that's pretty stupid. But like you literally can't. It's very clearly a disease. You know, and I was very much in the camp beforehand of I don't really understand how is this a disease, but like it's not rational. It can't be understood. You know, it's very clearly. You know, I really like Maya's book about a disease of learning. There's a lot of different theories out there, but compassion and just a recognition that there can be a life beyond. I've been very, very fortunate to be successful during my time in recovery, but it's only because, you know, I've had that support system. And so, thank you so much for the work you do.
Oh, you're welcome. I think that it's important to recognize that addiction can take many shapes and sizes, and we spend a lot of time talking about drug addiction, but we could talk about sex addiction, we can talk about gambling, we could talk about a number of addictions. I think that those of you who have young children I hope you're paying attention to social media and internet and phones, because I think the next wave of addiction with young people are going to be these horrific devices. Because we're losing a lot of folks, and you have access. One of the things I'll say, I talk about methamphetamine. People aren't making methamphetamine. So here we took Sudafed and we blocked it. People are getting it through the postal system. Some of the best drugs coming into this community are not coming from dealers per se, but they're coming from the US postal system. You can go on the dark web, you can go on a number of sites, and I've had people say to me, the best heroin in the world comes from France. Some of the best pills that I can get come from Asia, and you wouldn't even recognize that's what they are because they arrive in a brown paper box. You wouldn't even recognize that the drug is in that container. So if you have young people, if you have children, pay attention to what they're looking at, pay attention to what they're getting in the mail. It's easy to get Xanax in the mail, you wouldn't even know. It's easy to get pills, it's easy to get anything in the mail. You can get clean urine in the mail. So it's just really pay attention to what your young people have and what your kids are having, so. Any other thoughts or questions before I step down?
I feel like it might be a stupid question, but where is it coming from? Who's getting rich?
Well, depends what your source is. So you have dealers. A lot of the drugs we get from dealers are coming from Brooklyn, coming from Bronx in New York City. We have some gangs, I don't want to say gangs. We have some, when I say gangs, I'm talking groups of people. I'm not talking gangs like gangs that people have talked about. But we have folks that are here from Springfield, from Detroit, from Philadelphia. This is a really right market because what you get versus what you're getting in the city is oftentimes 5 times more. So they're getting rich by the fact that you have customers, you have people who want to get those substances.
You talk a lot about like removing shame from all this, and I'm curious, what role, if any, do you see prison playing in this? I mean, is there a role because I was just working in the district court where I saw a lot of sentencing of people who were clearly drug addiction.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get too crunchy on this, but what I'll quickly say, because I want to make sure I leave time for Grace and Catherine. You have addicted folks who are criminals and criminals who are addicts. And I think those are two very distinct, different populations. I think that we really need to look at those individuals, those dealers, those big dealers, when they are arrested by law enforcement, that they're held. They're not released on bail, they're not released on conditions, but we're holding them. And right now we have a group of folks who we would say need to get held, and judicial would say we're not going to hold them, we're going to release them. I think jail can serve a purpose. I'll go off a little bit off the reservation. I think it's great that we have passed a law that medication-assisted therapies are in jail right now. But I would also say that if you've got somebody incarcerated for a period of time, we need to now talk about how we're going to get them counseling, how we're going to get them services in jail. Medication is just one thing. And if you've got somebody who's been sentenced over 6 months, I would argue that as a state, we need to get services in the jail. If Rikers Island can do it, I find it inexcusable that Vermont can't do it. So I think that, yes, there's a role in jail for certain populations. There's a role for individuals to not be in jail, frankly, and to get services out in the community. So I'm gonna, yeah.
Well, my question to you is, how do you do it, right? So, you talked about a lot of people who sort of come to you, to speak to you, but who do you talk to, and how do you keep getting at it? Because one of the things, I think we're so lucky here in Burlington to have you and to have the chief and so on, but one of the things I get concerned about is
yeah.
Are we gonna hold on to it here?
Well, thank you. I will tell you, the chief had said to me, are you going to stay over a year? And I have to say that my heart is really in this position, and I learned a long time ago. I think I hit compassion fatigue. It's interesting you asked that question. Probably 6 months ago, I've been doing this for 32 years, and I actually experienced compassion fatigue when I was in my office one day. And I said to the chief, I can't do it anymore. Like, I'm just spent. And I knew at that point I needed to step away. And so recognizing when those thresholds get big and maybe calling folks like Grace or calling other folks who are in the field to say, hey, like, I just need to vent. I'm really blessed to have a partner who is a clinician, who worked for the Department of Corrections as a supervisor for 14 years. And I can say to him, as a fellow social worker, I just need to vent, and he'll just listen. I'm like, I don't need you to talk. I just need you to listen. And I also have kids, and I think what keeps me moving is my husband and I adopted 2 kids who were born to heroin-addicted moms. And I think that when I feel like I just can't do it, I look at their face and recognize I need to keep doing it. And I need to make sure that I'm taking care of myself, because I'm doing it for my 17-year-old and my 19-year-old. Because they're those kids, they were the ones that were born to babies, as babies to a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old. Both of their moms were addicted to heroin. And it's looking at them to keep me going, and I think recognizing when I need to stop and take a mental health break. Thank you for that. There are days when it's like you wonder, like, why are we doing this? But I go out and talk to my boss, or talk to the officers, or talk to other folks, and recognize it really is going to take a village. That I'm no more special than anyone else, and we've really got to work as a team together to do that. But yes, there are some days this becomes really hard for all of us out in the field. I'm going to step away. I'm going to leave these here. I'm going to encourage you to take them and help me pass them out. These are resource cards. And what we do is we give them to folks, because when they have that 2 a.m., like, oh my gosh, like, I just can't do this anymore, they can pick this card up, and every resource available is in this card. We took away the little police badge because that was freaking people out, and we put a little mayor's little building here, and we titled it Addiction Co-occurring Resources. We took away anything that looked like police language or lingo. So I'm going to leave those here. Feel free to take those and pass them out, please, because you never know when somebody will look at that card or pass it to somebody who needs the resource. And then also I'll just leave you, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to give me a call. I'm going to leave my card here as well, and give me a call. We're doing a lot, and I think I will end and say you folks are really fortunate to live in a city where you have people in the highest level of the administration giving 2 diddlies. I'm blown away by this chief, and sometimes he can be my nemesis, because he'll come in and be like, oh, I just read this article, and I'm like, oh my Lord, please, do you ever take a break? But when I really am at a place, I'm like, wow, he's cutting edge for law enforcement around the country, and he's really challenging his law enforcement partners to get out of this dogmatic slumber that they can hide behind. So if you see Chief Del Pozo, give him a pat on the back. And if you see those officers out there in blue, let them know they're doing a good job, because they feel, when you talk about taking care of yourself, they feel a lot of nights alone. And I think it would be great for Burlingtonians to say we appreciate the work that you're doing, because these folks are really up against it. Anyway, thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Grace Keller. I am the program coordinator at Howard Center Safe Recovery. I'm not sure if everybody knows what that is, so I'll talk a little bit about that. You can stop me in the middle if questions come up. Sometimes things are technical or they're on your mind right away, so feel free to stop me. I'm a little camera shy, so I'll be looking around the room. So Safe Recovery is Vermont's oldest, largest, and only full-time syringe exchange. We're located downtown Burlington at 45 Clark Street. So if you're facing Church Street, Clark Street runs to the right of it. We're about 3/4 of the way down on the left-hand side there, and we have a very bright green door. And we've been open since 2000, so we're 18 years in. And that's, what's important about that to me is that we have a 18-year trusted relationship with a very difficult to reach and serve population. So we have about 5,000 members over time. We last year saw about 1,300 people. And 34% of our clients are coming from outside of Chittenden County because the other syringe exchanges in the state aren't open for more than about 6 hours a week sometimes. So for a population that has very chaotic lives, knowing that they can show up and it's going to be open, I think has been really helpful. We do have clients from every county in the state, and so we start with our syringe exchange. We provide sterile syringes to people, and we also dispose of their syringes when they've used them. And one of the big things that we do for Burlington is we do community syringe retrieval. So if you ever find a syringe on the streets of Burlington, we are the folks that go out and retrieve them. If you call the police, they call us, and we go get them. We track them so we know where they are appearing, and we keep that data over time. And what's really great about syringe exchange, and then I'll get into the rest of what we do, is that cities that have syringe exchange, the data shows that there are much fewer syringes found on your streets. While one syringe found on the streets is too much for me as the program coordinator, our rates are very, very low here, and we know that because we track them. But the great part about syringe exchange is it's a strong and natural conduit to treatment. Safe Recovery's gotten more people into medication-assisted treatment, as Jackie's been talking about, than any other program in the state. So last year, we connected 228 people to medication-assisted treatment. Those are either through methadone or Suboxone. It's programs that get people maintenance medication. Medication-assisted treatment is the standard of care for opioid dependence, and it really is, especially in a fentanyl epidemic, a very important connection to make. It's what keeps people alive who are struggling with opioid dependence. So last year we connected 228 people to either the hub or the spoke, hub being the methadone clinic with a high level of care, or spoke being private doctors. And we work hard to make sure that they end up in the appropriate level of care. And that was when we still had a waiting list. So that's really, those are all people that we know actually went to their appointments. So we've been making those connections for people for a long time. We're also there for them. We're really one of the only programs that work with people who are, while they're actively using, which is really important because that's when you build the relationship so that they know when they want help, that there's a comfortable place that they can land and they can talk to somebody. We also do free Hep C and HIV testing, so we're testing people regularly for infectious disease and able to connect them to a doctor at the hospital very quickly. Especially we're testing at regular intervals, so we will be able to catch it early if somebody's testing positive. And we do Narcan, so community-based Narcan, which Jackie talked a little bit about. Narcan is a medication that when if somebody's overdosing, if you give it to them, it will reverse the effects of the opioid overdose and get the person breathing again in very short order. We did the majority of the testifying for Narcan, and actually what really brought Narcan to the state of Vermont were our clients. We brought our clients to the legislature, and they really told their stories, and that's when, in 2013, Vermont passed a community-based Narcan law. And that seems very cutting edge, but Narcan has been done in the community in Chicago since 1996. So this has been done for a very long time. It was FDA approved in 1960, so it's been around for a very long time. It's been used in ERs and ambulances since 1960. One of the things that came along with that law is that all ambulances in Vermont now carry Narcan. Prior to that law, there were a lot of ambulances that weren't carrying it. Drug users are scared to talk about overdose, so they were calling and saying, my friend's not breathing, or I think my friend had a heart attack. And if you picture somebody going out to Starksboro in an ambulance that doesn't have Narcan, they get there, they realize that they need this medication, and they either need to deploy another ambulance or get that person heading to a hospital. So we worked hard to make sure that all ambulances carried Narcan. What was really great about Vermont is our state police reacted almost immediately, and they started carrying Narcan. And now almost all of our police departments also have Narcan. And with that bill also went we also passed a Good Samaritan law, and it's the 911 Good Samaritan law. So if you call 911 in the case of a drug overdose, the person overdosing and anybody helping them cannot be charged with a drug crime in the state of Vermont anymore. So they can't be charged with possession of any amount, sales of any amount, delivery, which means I gave it to Jackie or she gave it to me, even if the person does not survive. They can't violate their probation, parole, house arrest, restraining order, or conditions of release. This is the broadest law in the country. It is incredibly important because what we know is that people were afraid to call for help. They still are, and we're still working through a lot of that. And there's very good reason why. They're very serious charges. We've had people go to jail for more than 20 years for what we would consider survival crime. One day somebody provides the heroin to a friend, the next day that friend provides the heroin to them. And especially at that time, Vermont had a waiting list that was almost 2 years. So anytime that somebody would come to our office and ask for help, we'd put them on a waiting list, and they'd wait, and we'd watch what happens to them over 2 years' time. I have watched people die, watched people go to jail, I've watched people lose custody of their children, all while asking for help. So it was really important then, especially, it's still important now, but people were using drugs and asking for help, and the very lucky and fortunate thing is that Narcan passed before fentanyl hit Vermont. We are still losing people at record rates. We've lost more people in the last 18 months at Safe Recovery than the 18 years that we've been around prior to that combined, or 17. So we're really working to get Narcan out into the community. We've given out 20,000 doses out of our office. That's usually to clients, their friends, their family members, their parents. I work a lot with parents. And then we've done 1,000 trainings in the community to providers. So places like COTS, Women Helping Battered Women are now called Steps 10 Domestic Violence Treatment Centers, are really working to make sure that when somebody overdoses, there's somebody there that has Narcan, knows what to do and how to respond. But despite that, we lost over 100 Vermonters last year to drug-related fatalities, and we moved to start dispensing fentanyl testing strips. So a way for drug users to tell that if there's fentanyl in the drugs that they're using, they will know that, and they will be able to mitigate their use or make changes. And sometimes we've actually had people tell us that they've thrown it out. That's rare. That shocked even me. It takes a lot to shock me. That shocked me. But what it is, it's like a tiny little pregnancy test. It looks like a pregnancy test, and they can put it in the drugs that they have. They hold it there for about 15 seconds, lay it flat, and one line is positive, 2 lines negative. They will know instantly whether fentanyl is in their drug supply. And what we tell people is to make sure that they have Narcan if they're going to continue to use it a lot less, and to make sure that they're not alone. Now, this may seem uncomfortable to people to be talking to drug users about those kind of things, but the reality is people are using drugs, and we need to keep them as safe as possible. And we need to make sure that they have as much information about what's happening to them as possible. And so lastly, our newest initiative is low barrier access to buprenorphine at Safe Recovery. So instead of when they come to us and they ask us for treatment, us having to reach out and figure out where they're gonna go and try and squeeze them anywhere, we hired Dr. Kimberly Blake, and about 2 weeks ago we started, or about 7 business days ago, we started being able to dose people immediately. So if they were asking for treatment, we can give it to them right then and there. And what that showed me, what I already knew, is that people in the syringe exchange don't want to be in the syringe exchange. They want to be in treatment. But for a lot of our community, treatment hasn't applied to them for whatever reason. You know, we have a lot of people that are struggling with mental health issues. We have a lot of people that work, that the hours don't fit in for them. We have a lot of people who have been discharged from treatment centers. So our goal is to make sure that people get the medication when they ask for it. We obviously do a medical evaluation to make sure that they're appropriate. We give them a prescription that day, and then we have them meet with a social worker. And at that point, we're looking at where we're going to send them for permanent placement. So if they can go to the hub or the Chittenden Clinic, we will send them there. We do a risk score evaluation. If they are very low risk, then we work on getting them into their primary care doctor. And then we applied for a SAMHSA grant. So all of this has happened in the last 3 months, basically. And we applied for a grant from the federal government and got it, which was another thing that shocked me. Not that I don't think we should get it, but the federal government syringe exchange, there's a ban on federal funding to syringe exchange. So that's something that anybody who works in my field knows. It's very hard to get federal funding, and you can't use it on syringes and other parts of components of what we do. So we wrote this grant and we got it. And what that grant was about treatment access. So it supports the low barrier, but it also supports the treatment portion at Safe Recovery. So we are going to keep people at Safe Recovery in our office who have burned every other bridge. So people who can't go anywhere else are going to be staying with me, which is where I want to be. I want to be with that population. They're already our clients. They've been our clients for a very long time. It's really where we shine and where we specialize, and it's where our hearts are. So they're going to stay with us, and we are going to have dosing wheels, which are wheels where you put their medication in each day, like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like you've seen before. But unlike you've seen before, it's a metal wheel that opens each day for a period of time. You can get your dose out, and then it seals back up. So if you miss that window, you will not be able to get the medication out of it. They are not indestructible, but close to it, and if you try to destruct it, it will be very obvious. You'll have to run it over with a car, or beat it with a hammer. They're very strong, very significant devices. So all of those people will be dosed that way. We can also put other medications in there, so you can help people remember to take their meds. And so that's really the broader view of it. And I was going to say this before Jackie left. They picked somebody up the other day, and that person told them that they were struggling, and within 40 minutes we had them in front of our doctor and had them started on treatment, within the hour, which is really what needs to happen. We should never have been in a situation where people had to ask for help over and over again. And the only way that I considered even entering the treatment realm is if I could always say yes. So that's where we're at Safe Recovery. I feel very lucky to be part of Howard Center. Howard Center is really, in my field, pushing the envelope in ways that are really focused on saving people's lives and nothing short of that. It's really looking at how are we helping these people right now. And I think what I've seen too is when we meet people where they are in the syringe exchange, and these are people that know me and that have known me for a very long time, they access treatment in ways that they never have before. So some people who we're looking at are people that have never been treated by anyone before. And then there's some people that have been treated by everyone. And if you called to get them in anywhere, they're not getting in anywhere at all. And we've made the commitment that we're not going to discharge people for any reason at all. We have been very, very, very lucky that we don't have issues of violence at our office. We've, in 18 years, have only had one. That person was very intoxicated. It could have happened anywhere, I believe. But other than that, we've never had to call the police for a violent episode, ever. We've had, unfortunately, 17 times we've had people brought to our office overdosed. And our staff has had to use Narcan. I've had to do rescue breathing multiple times. And all of those times the person has survived, but only by luck. So that's why we really want to make sure that we're reaching everybody with all of these interventions, especially with Vermont being as rural as it is. And so I feel very lucky to be in this position. I feel very, I know, where'd he go? The guy who asked how we do this. The truth is, where we get to bear witness to the hardest of this opioid epidemic, we also get to bear witness to the best and the most resilient people that you'll meet in this state. So I have clients that just came into my office the other day, and I hadn't seen them all winter last year, and basically I hadn't seen them since about February. And I said, how's it going? And they're like, oh, we're great. We've been in the clinic and we've been clean and sober since January. And I was like, okay, well, where are you living? And they've been living in a tent since January of last year. So these are people that get up in the morning, get out of the tent, walk over a mile to the clinic, take their dose, and walk over a mile back. They both work part-time here and there. I mean, that's resilience that I don't have, and that's what the community needs to realize. These people are fighting for their lives every single day, and which is why I feel it's important to make sure that we give them every chance that they have to survive what's turning into be a very terrible situation. Like Jackie said, I never imagined that we'd be looking back to a time where heroin was our biggest. I never imagined that anything would pass the heroin epidemic that we were dealing with for so many years. But fentanyl coming in is just about as terrible as any drug. Every way you look at it, it's much worse than heroin. It's much more potent. It's also much more short acting, so people are using high doses of this medication more regularly. And it's also undetectable other than for tests. So when fentanyl first hit, people were very worried that clients, I call them clients, but drug users were attracted to it. Traditionally, we ask people on intake whether they've witnessed an overdose or whether they've overdosed themselves, and usually that's around 23 to 26%. For the 11 years that I've been at Safe Recovery, that's the case. And last year, that number jumped to 81% in 1 year. So that's fentanyl right there. I mean, you are seeing it in our statistics. Every statistic I look at, we're seeing those things happening. So our clients are sufficiently afraid at this point. They're taking care of each other. They're trying to get into treatment. They're trying to do the best they can. But we're really seeing what's a very scary situation and what we all need to be aware of and we need to be talking about. And like Jackie said, the biggest issue facing our program, one of the biggest things we all need to face is the stigma. And the shame and the stuff that Jackie's talking about is very real. It's not something that just lives in the clouds. We have people that are very afraid to get help. We have people terrified to talk about what's going on for them. And we have people that carry the shame with them for the rest of their lives. And that's not anything anybody wants or thinks is helpful or productive. The second person we offered low barrier buprenorphine to, the only thing that she was concerned about is that somebody else might need it more than her. And that's stigma. I mean, that's a serious situation that we need to address, because the truth of the matter is no one needs it more than her. And I can't believe I'm gonna tear up on camera, but and that's because they've all had to take care of each other, and that's a serious situation that we need to look at. It's also what happens when you have a scarcity mentality for treatment, because there's always gonna be somebody that's standing behind you that oh boy, there's always somebody standing behind you that they picture is a perfect person that's not gonna struggle in treatment, that's gonna be perfect every single time. We see it with housing too, where people need housing, and they start to slip in their housing, or they're not paying their rent, or their music's too loud, and they say, well, there's somebody behind you that's a single mom or a single dad that's not gonna act out here. And so we need to realize that that stuff is so internalized for clients, and it's killing people. So I can say the good news is the only good side effect to fentanyl is it has brought a lot of people to the table. And Jackie, as she touched on it, one of our closest allies is the Burlington Police Department, and you wouldn't hear, I work in the syringe exchange, I run the syringe exchange, I speak my mind. I'm very lucky that Howard lets me do that. I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. We are incredibly lucky to have the support of the Burlington Police Department. They are, Chief Pozo was really pushing for this initiative for low barrier buprenorphine. I went to Vancouver last year to look at safe injection sites as an exploratory thing with a bunch of other states. And I was with a group of law enforcement there. And their law enforcement, we can't even get there, a lot of those states for law enforcement to even understand that medication-assisted treatment is important. Every day that somebody takes Suboxone is a day that they are protected from dying from opioid overdose. So it is absolutely critical that we get these medications into people and keep them stable and meet them where they are. So we are incredibly lucky to have that. And to have somebody who's willing to look at this in a different way. And somebody who's willing to look at mental health in a different way, and their de-escalation tactics that I can say I've seen firsthand. And I come from Philadelphia, where they're not, they don't focus on those kind of things. And I really think that we have a great partnership. The ComStat meetings that she's talking about have really pushed the system and pushed the system in a way that's been helpful. And I can say that the community has responded, not just to ComStat, but in general to the call from fentanyl, to reducing our waiting lists. I mean, people are getting into treatment at our office immediately now, but all over the state, people are getting into treatment better. Waiting one day is too long, but the fact is, it's not 2 years, it's not even, 6 months, and that's huge for people. Yep, that's good. But I'll answer anybody's questions, whatever people have. Yeah.
Can you clarify a little bit more about the low barrier access? So if somebody comes in and so right away they can receive the treatment right there, but then you're looking out to the hub and spoke to sort of see. Is that something that's like working in that way? Like how are you, I'm just trying to think if you were a doctor holding so many people too, and like how does that work?
Yeah.
It's inspiring to see that there's actually movement.
Well, we'll see. So I think we've had maybe 8 days that we've been doing this, and she has 30 spots, and we're hitting those 30 spots probably tomorrow. And we're hiring another doctor. If anybody knows a harm reduction doctor, we have an advertisement out right now. And that's the federal government also. There's a 30 patient limit on anybody who is a new buprenorphine prescriber. Our doctor has been a doctor in this community for, I think, 30 years. She has a ton of experience, but no matter who she is and no matter what she does and what she brings to the table, she will always have 30 patients limit until she's done with her first year. So what our goal is now, since we filled up so quickly, we're doing a couple in and a couple out, so we transitioned 3 people out today. And then we can take 3 more. I think we can take 5 tomorrow. We're close to that. And we're really trying to get people and not just into care, into the appropriate level of care. So, because we know that retention is based on, basically on appropriate level of care. If somebody's very, very low risk and they have to go to the clinic every day, they're not gonna do that. If they have a job and they have, a lot of other supports and they have things that are in place, they need to be in a doctor's office, and we know that. So it's really focused on getting that. But you're right, there are system constraints, so we're gonna have to figure that out. It's also why we're looking to hire a second doctor, because we are gonna keep at least 50 people at Safe Recovery that can't get in anywhere else. So nobody's gonna get dropped. We are gonna continue them, and they will stay with us if they have to.
And that 30 patient limit, that's only for the first year?
First year.
What happens after this?
It goes to 100.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's arbitrary. Really, it's in drug policy, almost. I mean, when you look at a lot of these drug laws, especially the ones that fuel the war on drugs, a lot of it's arbitrary. It's why you look at it and you want to know why, and there's not. There's no other medication that has limits like that. So, and then if you are certified in addiction if you have that specialty, you can go to 275. So there are doctors in the community. Dr. Brooklyn is one of them that can go that high. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you
for
being here.
Well, no, thank you all for coming. I mean, this is what I do this because it's the best way to fight stigma. It's also the best way to people need to be able to ask their questions, and they need to know what's going on.
One last question. So
Oh,
what
yeah.
do you suggest, with your experience in terms of trying to get that stigma, push back on the stigma, what would you suggest we do for our community to get that message out?
I mean, I think we need to start seeing people, just seeing. I mean, you can't answer this question without sounding corny. I'm going to go ahead and do it. I mean, I think we need to see people for being people. I mean, these people are struggling, but like I said with the stories earlier, I mean, that's what they are. They're just struggling. But they're like any of us, and they want what we all want, and they want to be productive members of society. And I mean, I sit with my clients at the doctor's office, and I sit with my clients on Church Street, and I see how they're viewed by the community. And we need to realize that that's all of us, that we need to not be looking at people that way. We need to teach our kids that. A lot of kids live in households that have drug use going on. And if it's not our kids, we're very lucky, but we should be teaching kids compassion and teaching kids that this is something that it's not bad to talk about. because I know in my generation, nobody talked about this stuff. So I think it's really important to be talking to kids and keeping them informed, but also making sure that they're seeing this as their problem too, and that's something that they can help with and not just bear witness to, especially if they're living with it at home. I'm on the Governor's Prevention Council, which was really interesting when I was asked to be on that, because I was thinking, I mean, I know how to prevent hepatitis C and I know how to prevent overdose, but the Prevention Council is really looking at kids and looking at families, and I know the way I've sort of worked through it is I know how people got where they got to, how they came through my office, and I can tell you the vast majority of it is trauma and poverty. I mean, it's not rocket science. You can look around and you can see it's generational poverty, generational trauma. Yes, we have outliers. We have people that from all walks of life, but the vast majority of people are coming from that. And so, you know, promoting resiliency in kids, making sure that kids know who to talk to, and really, that's where the fact that we have stigma in our generation, and I'm talking all of our generation, is crazy in 2018. But the fact that it's in our schools and things like that is really, and it is killing people. It's what's preventing people from getting help every single day. So, yeah.
Do you see marijuana as a gateway drug to this?
Well, a lot of people do, and the way I look at it is really on an individual level, more than I look at whether for people that was what they were struggling with. It's a hard question to answer, because by the time they come to me, it's a non-issue. I mean, by the time they've gotten to me, so much has happened in the middle of that there's, because I'm seeing the people who are struggling the most. I mean, by the time you're at the syringe exchange, there's so much else going on. And then for some people, marijuana really helps. And that's, so it runs the gamut of, it's a very hard question to answer, because I do have clients that say that marijuana is the only thing that keeps them sober from everything else. But it is something we definitely need to be talking about in schools. We all know that that's where a lot of this starts. What I can say from my clients is that we ask people when they started using their primary drug. So for these people, for most of our clients, it's opioids. And it is, I think it's 40%, I should have looked this up before I came, but 45% that started before they were 18, and 35% that started before they were 16. These are opioids, so this isn't marijuana. And it is not uncommon for somebody to tell me they were 10 or 11 years old, and that is shocking. So for those people, and for people that are using opioids by 16, it's a chicken or the egg. I mean, it's marijuana or opiates. They're exposed so much. But
there's compelling elements besides that.
Right, and anytime we can delay onset of drug use in kids and delay onset of any drug or alcohol use is a win, and that's where we can prevent addiction in the long run. So, yeah.
Would you lump nicotine in with that? I mean, I know, I was definitely a smoker, and the Juul thing caught me up after I'd been not smoking for a while, and that seems really wild.
Smoking in the population that I work with, well, now we're talking about methamphetamine, which is a whole nother day. But my population until 3 months ago was predominantly opioids. In the 11 years that I've been at my job, I probably have a handful of clients that don't smoke. Smoking is a huge side effect. This is a huge side effect of poverty. It's very rare that people don't smoke, and I lost both my parents to cancer, so it's something I pay a lot of attention to. And it's something we do talk about a lot. It's when you're looking at facing fatal overdose, it's not something I'm talking to people about in that moment, but it is something that people talk about quite a bit, so. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. And I have my cards, and I have Safe Recovery rack cards. We've changed so much since we made them, which was only 6 months ago, so give them out, but the low barrier access and the fentanyl testing strips are not on there. Oh, no, no. We're open, that's a dream, I would love to be, but we're open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We do close down from 12 to 1, because the syringe exchange is like a store, a free store, but it's, you know, we have to restock and do all of that stuff, so, thank you. And I'll put my cards next to Jack. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Oh, and I did bring Narcan. If anybody wants Narcan, they can, come to me, I can train you briefly. Or you can take my card and call me, or you can stop at 45 bucks for you, and we'll get it to you. It's anonymous.
Thank you. So my name is Catherine Antley, and I'm a physician in South Burlington, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I guess I'm just going to, before we start, we have two quick videos, but I just wanted to say a couple remarks, because this is just sort of, we're all in shell shock after listening to this tremendous work that's happening in our city. So what Iceland is about, and what my talk is about, is I'm going to tell a story. So in Iceland, they tell the story, and many of you maybe have already heard this, or maybe not. Two guys are standing by the river, and they look out, and there's a baby coming down the river, and they dive into the river, and they save that baby, and they're all wet, and they're panting, and they're a hero, and the city gives them a medal, and everybody around them tells them how great they are, and then they look up, and there's another one, and they jump in, and they get that baby, and same thing happens, and then they look up, and there are 3 babies, and there's 2 guys going in there trying to get the 3 babies out, and they get the 3 babies out, and then they look up, and there are 10 babies coming. So Jackie is all wet. This is so we're shifting. So the end of the story goes that they come along, and they tap them on the shoulder, and they say, "Look upstream." And the babies are all chunking in the water because there's no barriers. So this is the idea of prevention, and this is the idea of Iceland. It's all about focusing our resources and energy and talent on building those barriers so our babies aren't in the water, and so that our most valuable prevention caregivers rather, aren't always in the water in extremis. So in Vermont right now, and in Burlington right now, we're spending lots and lots and lots of money. We all know that, right? We're spending money on crime, we're spending money on lost education, we're spending money on the cost of drug addiction is horrific. We're spending money on a safe harbor. So what prevention is about is going upstream, and this is in, I work with upstream Lamoille County, and we just renamed our group, and so upstream is sort of the catchphrase. And if you spend $1 upstream, it's worth $10 of Dr. Blake or Jackie working on trying to treat people who are in intensive care. So the other idea is, or analogy is, you have physicians who are highly trained to deal with your stroke or your MI or your automobile accident, and broken and they go into intensive care, and it's frightfully expensive. And so physicians are trained to do that, right? So they're highly trained to do that kind of medicine, right? But there's a whole nother kind of medicine that deals with let's move an hour a day, or let's eat right, let's work on mindfulness. So all this prevention, teaching kids to eat right, and all that prevention side, not have sugar if you have diabetes, that's not expensive, right? That's all primary care, and that is a whole different kind of medicine. I mean, another analogy is so polio. In the 50s, everybody was worried about polio, and rightly so. So you could keep your kid from going into the swimming pools. It was very difficult. So you could either try to vaccinate all the kids, and that's one kind of skill set, right? Making lists of all those kids, knocking on all those doors, making sure every single kid, right, is vaccinated. That's an important job, and if it's not done, we end up with kids in braces and wheelchairs, right? And that's expensive. So the point of this talk is let's vaccinate. It's all about prevention. It's all about upstream Vermont. So we have heard a little bit about this, but this is, so 90% of, more than 90% of the people with a substance problem began smoking, drinking, or using other drugs before the age of 18. That is what Iceland is about. And what Iceland teaches us is that in 20 years, you can go from very high abuse rates to closing 4 out of 6 rehabs. So focusing on this prevention is hopeful and possible and saves money and helps in so many ways. Here's another one that they just got out from the CDC. Heroin is part of a larger substance abuse problem. People who are addicted to alcohol are 2 times as likely to be addicted to heroin. It's the same thing they're talking about. They're addicted to not just one thing, but many things, often what happens. So, so that's sort of just a preamble of what, kind of conceptually as a paradigm, what we're talking about. We're talking about upstream. We're talking about how we solve this crisis that we're in by focusing on the kids. Right? So let's, and one piece of that, so my talk generally is in 2 parts. One is on, it talks a little bit about why the heck are we dealing with these substances in such big numbers. And it's got, some of it has to do with industry and the industry of addiction and the economics of addiction. So I do begin with that piece. And we have 2, and then the other piece is, the other film is a little bit about how the brain works. And so the industry of addiction is focused on addicting your child, because that's how they make the most money. And how do they do that? They do that by trying to addict children, because children are more easily addicted for the rest of their life. And then they also produce substances in their labs that are more highly addictive. So with tobacco, they spray the leaves with the freebase nicotine. With heroin, we've seen these, fentanyl is an example, oxycodone. They come up with all these permutations which are more and more addictive. So these are the 2 main ways that they get into an industry of addiction. So let's watch the 2 films just for a few minutes, and then we'll.
As concerned about
worry about time management. We are sort of, because of the compelling nature of the other, all these presentations, I've kind of lost a little bit of control of our agenda in terms of time. I don't want to short anybody in this who come to present to us. And I'm not going to short you, Catherine. I'm wondering about the possibility, I want to discuss just briefly the possibility of Scott coming back another time at another meeting so that we don't short you. Would that be a possibility?
Well, that's entirely up to Scott.
Because I don't want to compress anybody, and I've sort of gotten a little.
It's all right.
Do you mind doing that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
the health risks increases, cigarette companies design ad campaigns with doctors. The strategy is to confuse. How could something be bad if doctors say it is good? Ads state that cigarettes are good for you, good for digestion, weight loss, stress and tension relief. We begin with a niche market, with some states banning cigarette use. Health concerns are raised, but the industry pushes ahead, marketing with doctors. It's 1950, and big tobacco is booming, one of the most profitable industries in the world. The smoking rate is nearly 4,000 cigarettes per person per year. And then, the 1952 issue of Reader's Digest, the most popular magazine in America, publishes the article, Cancer by the Carton. In reaction, the heads of large tobacco companies hold a secret meeting in New York's Empire State Building in December of 1953. They decide to sow doubt about the health findings of cigarettes. They pay to publish an article called A Frank Statement to Cigarette Smokers, in 448 newspapers. It questions evidence that cigarettes cause cancer. And like tobacco, big marijuana is using all the same strategies. Tactic 1, make smoking marijuana seem good for you. Smoking tobacco was linked to lung cancer in 1929, but it took 30 years and millions of deaths to prove that it can cause lung cancer. Marijuana is positioned as medicinal, but studies show that it negatively affects the brain. It's been linked to IQ loss, increases mental illness, and according to every single scientific body, is addictive. And for young people whose brains are still developing, marijuana has an irreversible impact. Addiction rates go way up. 1 in 6 who start marijuana use before age 18 become addicted. And for daily smokers, the risk of addiction rises to 50%. School dropout rates increase, and the risk of schizophrenia increases by 600%.
In the brain chemistry of addiction video, we learn that youth are especially susceptible to addiction. The youth brain is easily rewired compared to the adult brain, which has more solid neural pathways.
Imagine that someone has an apple and takes a big bite. Dopamine is released in the brain. Dopamine is a naturally occurring neurotransmitter that helps us experience pleasure and creates the motivation for us to do things that are necessary for our survival. If you could graph dopamine and its effect on mood, it would look something like this. When dopamine rises, we feel good. This teaches the brain that food is important and that we should seek food when needed, even subconsciously. This same thing happens when we achieve a goal. Dopamine is released and we feel good, and this teaches the brain that achieving goals is important. This reward mechanism is essential since the brain is learning things necessary for survival. Now back to addiction. Someone chooses to try a drug. The user may feel a high and it may feel great temporarily. Dopamine levels rise a lot, 2 to 10 times what would occur with natural rewards. This can trick the brain into thinking that the drug is important for survival, perhaps even the most important thing for survival.
The alcohol video explains data and research not generally known about alcohol use disorder. Here's a short clip from the alcohol video.
However, when it comes to alcohol use, very few people are average. According to one of the largest scale research studies on the topic, the NESARC survey of about 44,000 adults, nearly 50% of adults either don't drink at all or drink very little. The next 10% drinks less than a drink a week. The next 10% drinks 2.2 drinks per week, followed by 10% who drink 6.3 drinks per week, or about a drink a day. The next 10% drinks 15.3 drinks per week, or about 2 drinks per day. The last 10%, an estimated 24 million adult Americans, drink an average of 74 drinks per week, which is 75% of the alcohol adults consume. Many in this group are devastated by alcohol, and it has dramatic impact on friends and family.
The opioids and heroin video explains the trends that have led overdose.
So that kind of sets the stage for what we're going to talk about in the rest of the talk. So what we learn is that what are the drivers of addiction, the brain science of addiction, of brain chemistry, and then we're going to talk about prevention and treatment. So what's important from that is that we have an extremely powerful industry in the United States and all over the world, and even illegal drug pushers who are interested in one thing. They want to produce an addict. And the reason they want to produce an addict is because of what we saw there. The majority of alcohol is consumed by a very small percentage of the people. The majority of the opiates are consumed by this very small group of people. Same thing with cigarettes. It's someone who smokes once a week right, after dinner is not interesting at all for the industry. So we have huge, powerful forces which are commercialized and industrialized, which are interested in creating addicts. And that's part of the landscape, and until we sort of take that into consideration in our fight against addiction, we won't really get any headway. So right now we're focused a lot on dealing with the crisis, but this talk is about what's the cause and how do we get at the cause of a crisis. So addiction is a pediatric disease. Jackie has stories which were horrible, but this talk is about right now in Vermont. There's water all over the kitchen floor, and we're on our hands and knees mopping it up, and we're not looking at the broken pipe. So dealing with trying to change this curve, Iceland is about changing this curve and creating kids, or making an environment for kids so that they don't become addicts in the first place. That's what this is entirely about. So it's pediatrics. In other words, if you can have a school where kids get to 21 without using, or if they get to 25 without using, they can practically use reasonably for the rest of their life without ever being an addict. So this is sort of the key of how we prevent our society from producing addicts. So addiction is a public health issue. It can be cured and it can be prevented. So this talk is hopeful. It's not, we know from Iceland that we can cure it. Iceland, the second half of the talk is what did they do and how did they do it, and we probably won't have time for it. But they can do it. We can do it if we invest.
If we don't have time for it, we'll do it another time.
Okay. So this is the wonderful curve. They went from the highest using group in Europe to the lowest. So in 1992, they had a crisis. They did have health care, they had pretty good housing, whatnot, but of all of the European nations, they had the highest use rates, and they were in a crisis. And what are we going to do? This is awful. And the Icelandic model is what they did to bring them down. So the developing brain is easily addicted. Youth exposed to addictive products become more easily dependent, and highly concentrated product addict more quickly. So these are the two important things that industry does to manipulate us and to target our children as soon as they're born. It's harder for a 25-year-old, we've already been through this, exposed to addictive product for the first time to become an addict. The brain has primary stage of development. No one's exposed later in life. If one's exposed later in life, it's easier to use in moderation, to stop out of choice, or recover from addiction entirely. This is the diagram of how we are now. We have researchers who have good information. Unfortunately, they're publishing their information, but nobody's reading it. Chip Estate is blind to a lot of the things that are inside this particular talk. While we're focused all on diving in and saving the babies, we're not focused on looking upstream at how we can really turn the battleship and cure the problem. Iceland says, and this is another quote from our own RAND report, the near daily users account for 80% of the expenditures, so for-profit companies can be expected to focus on creating and maintaining these heavy users. Dependence is good for the bottom line. So for actually, this is a higher number, so a smaller percentage use more, but it's true for any addictive substance. 80% of what's consumed is consumed by 20% of consumers. That's the reason the industry is interested in creating addicts. That's the reason the industry has to have addicts in order to have any profit at all. And then the other part of his quote is our free speech doctrine makes it very difficult to restrict advertising and marketing to children. And that's unique to the United States. And so that's our headwinds. So in Iceland, they recognized this, no advertising. So no alcohol advertising, no tobacco advertising. These are things that policy wins. on a policy level. So this is, you know, here we see the tobacco companies have their product right next to candies and whatnot, and that's how they attract children. So, two significant factors. Those with substance abuse disorders fight against two significant factors, and they don't even know these forces exist. One is this whole lecture, mini lecture inside this lecture about the economics of addiction, and the other is the brain chemistry of addiction. So no one gives these lectures. Industry doesn't want you to hear these lectures because once you're aware of it, you might go out and do things to prevent them from creating their addicts that they need. But it's very important information. And it's the important information that we need to really turn battleship to fix the pipe that's under the sink. We also know that in terms of taxes, the costs of these addicts, so when we produce addicts, they're not going to work, they're crashing cars, maybe they become a heroin addict, they're very, very expensive in the end. The revenues that you get is almost nothing. So you won't get, you'll get about 10% of the revenue of the taxes you pay for the costs of the addicts, which are created from the industry, for the industry. And what we've seen over time is that our taxes have plummeted. So we have a very powerful alcohol industry in Vermont, and if we had a lot of taxes, we could have, you know, Anheuser-Busch rehabs on every corner. We could have Anheuser-Busch substance abuse counselors in every school, but they don't allow the tax to be high enough to support rehabs and counselors the way that we would like and need. So the other way to look at this is the industry is doing a lot of harm because addicts are very suffering. We suffer, they suffer, our community suffers, and the industry is running away with the product and they won't let go of any of that money in order to help us treat those addicts. So myths that industry wants you to believe there's nothing we can do about addiction rates. This isn't true. And one thing I find that's really inspiring about Iceland is that when they started, they had an adult population that was using a lot. A heavy using adult population. And yet those addicts, just like we've talked about a number of times tonight, they're people. They care about their kids. They want to be good parents. And as we saw in Iceland, they were able to do things, the interventions, over time, and have children and grandchildren that were not addicts. So I find that very, very hopeful. So basically, 10% of the population is an addict no matter what our public policy is. We know that that's not true. Here's a community that had very high addiction rates. They changed public policy, and they instituted very serious interventions and brought their addiction rate way down. Things we can do, yeah, the industry wants to tell you that it's all about people's genetics or mental illness. There's nothing you can do. But we know that if it's all about genetics or mental illness, that this number wouldn't have come down. Therefore, our focus must be on the treatment of 10%, which we must always treat the addict. This is what we've talked about before. It's multifactorial. So this is the second part of the talk. How did Iceland prove to the world that addiction is preventable and that prevention saves money for the community by decreasing crime, healthcare costs, lost educational goals, prevent connected communities, saving money.
So, Catherine, since it is now 8:30, I'm wondering about talking about opening up for some questions right now, and then having you back to another meeting so that we can talk about, okay, how did Iceland do this?
Sure, yeah.
Because I think it's important that we have space for some questions, and we've come to the end of our time period. So, what kind of questions do you have?
I don't have a question, but I feel really disturbed by your presentation, and I think it has to do with how many times you use the word addict. And the previous two people, they never used that word addict. They talked about people, and about your presentation the way your presentation just sort of othered.
The word addict is not a good word. It should be a person with a substance abuse problem is really a much better, and I'm grateful that you brought that up. I think that what is very important about Iceland is a non-judgmental program. So when you get into Iceland, they say, this is all about changing the environment. What we've known for not decades, but many decades, that kids are a product of their environment. So they never say, you should say no to drugs. Like, right, so part of our thing is to tell our kids how to say no. That's not even part of the discussion. Because that starts to say, well, if I did say yes, then there's something wrong with me, right? There's no judgment there. They think kids are going to do what other kids are going to do. It's up to us as parents to make our environment healthy, happy, so that they can live happy, healthy lives. So what starts in Iceland is, they start about when you come home from the hospital with your baby, you're able to make your apartment cover light switches and lock up the poisons, right? When you have a teenager, it's all about us. So what Iceland, in the second half of the program, as we get into it, it's all about us linking between bonds between communities. So that, for example, my child or my children were teenagers, we're growing up a long way. As we get to know each other, we get to know our kids' parents, and there's lots that they do, but foundationally, you cannot do Iceland without having interconnected communities, without having a non-judgmental attitude. It's not at all judgmental, and
Yeah, I'll jump in on that because I definitely identify as an addict occasionally, depending on the context. I'm also a gambler myself, but the struggle is real. I manage people, and I hate it. Hate's a strong word. I really hate people say resources, and I find myself referring to people resources all the time. And when you're talking about public policy in particular, it's super easy to kind of fall into that. And I think that it probably just depends on kind of what you're used to, but the harm reduction and as long as you're sincere in your interactions with individuals, I think that you're certainly fine.
What you want to, one thing that you want to convey is that if you have a baby and there's an industry out there that's targeting that baby's brain, right? And to create a person with a substance abuse problem, or to create, that's not that baby's fault, right? That's not that parent's fault. So that's really where I'm coming from. We have enormous resources in Burlington. If we were to focus them on, changing the environment, on interconnectedness, and doing some of the things we can talk about later that Iceland did, then we can turn it around. But if we spend all of our time and all of our focus on intensive care, we just not going to have the resources to go vaccinate everybody for polio. That's a problem. It's not a problem that people are talking about. That's the other thing that one of the reasons I love to give this talk is at the end of the talk, it talks about how, in addition to closing 4 out of 6 rehabs, they also had an increase, decreasing sexual violence against women, a decrease in sexual violence, period, a decrease in bullying in the schools, increase in lots of artistic expressions, musical expressions, creativity. So there's a flowering, and people not going home getting high all day, all evening, but because they've come along their whole childhood with different activities, filling up the after-school times, hobbies, sports, whatnot. They're doing a lot of things. There's a lot of music. There's a lot of classical music. There's a lot of popular music. There's a lot of art. So it's a hopeful message.
So I think we're going to have to end. We have to say, I'm really sorry to not get to the second half of the presentation, but I'm sure that we will at the beginning that we kind of imagined this as really the initiation or the beginning of a conversation in this neighborhood, in these neighborhoods, in this ward about these issues. And I really hope that in fact that's what we will continue to do, because it's not something that we usually talk about at the NPA meetings, but it's an important, obviously an important topic. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for coming. We haven't announced the result of the election.
Yes, our new steering committee member will be Mohammed. What I would say to Billy is, I think all the steering committee positions are going to be open again sometime in the spring, and I think at least one or two of them will be open because there's some rules about how many years you can serve in a row. I think Alec actually is termed out, maybe perhaps. But in any event, so I would encourage you to come back, of course. And we'll look forward to working.
Thank you both for.
I really appreciated that you said you'd be here anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you both for offering your services. And thank you, Kathy.
Oh, thank you.
Again. These are the cards and Jackie left, so please pick them up. They're both to contact them and to hand out to you who might need them. And thank you, Lauren, for doing it. There's still snacks back there, so you avail yourself of them.
I don't usually get for chat.
You what?
I usually get only reach out for their motion on chat.
Where do you
You were there with your friend.
Oh, yeah. It's all up here. We probably didn't get official. Earlier you can talk about it.
Which street you live on?
I live right on High Street.
Yeah. Okay.
This street.
Okay.
Hey, yeah.
Thanks for coming.
City council.
And thanks for.
16 years.